Namaste and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. This is number 254, and this evening Sraddhalu will take up Siddhis from Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga, as well as related questions. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad, and welcome to all of our viewers and friends. I had announced last time a particular topic for today, but for various reasons that will be postponed until next month. So, this month being Sri Aurobindo's month, I propose to explore special facets of his writings which are little known, particularly centering around his personal diary notes, which are published under the title of Record of Yoga. During the period when Sri Aurobindo was in intense sadhana in his early years in Pondicherry, he had just arrived from British India to French India, and on the Adesh, command from the divine, to go to Pondicherry for the purpose of the sadhana. And for a period of 5 years, he was intensely immersed in sadhana as led by the divine guidance of the Lord. He would refer to all often as Sri Krishna, in the framework of practice given to him, which is the basis of the integral yoga. The entire framework we have discussed many times before, and particularly in the evening series, I believe from 80s onwards, we had taken up the framework of the integral yoga itself, beginning with the first business of a sadhaka, that was the title, and then on to the structure of the yoga itself. I will not be going into that structure. Rather, we will be looking at Sri Aurobindo's personal diary notes during his practice of that framework, and not the entire thing because it's quite voluminous and sometimes very complex and deep, with a lot of technical terms, many of which we may not fully appreciate for what they mean. Rather, we will take up specific themes within the structure of the record of yoga as well as Sri Aurobindo's experiences, tapping largely on his early experiences because they are more accessible to us. And today's topic will be Siddhis. In the framework of the integral yoga, you will remember there is the first chatushtaya, the first limb, which is the peace and equality. The second one, which is the amplification of power. The third one, which is the ascension beyond the mind. And Vijnana Chatushtaya, essentially opening to the supramental consciousness. But within that, there are many facets, and the first of these is the opening to intuition, a higher, diviner knowledge, which is a preparatory step towards the supermind. But consequent to the intuition is the awakening of certain powers in the Sanskrit yoga tradition, often referred to as Siddhis. Siddhi, the word in Sanskrit, means perfection, but also attainment. That is, you reach a perfected state. So it includes both the idea of attaining to something, but in its completeness, in its perfection, in its finality. So you have a Siddhi of a yoga when you reach the goal of the yoga. It has been perfected and completed. So Siddhi is a term also used in other terms, in other contexts where you attain to any kind of goal. Here, the goal often is used in the context of powers acquired. So when in the yoga tradition we say, so and so has a Siddhi of seeing the future, that means he has attained to that power and is able to then see the future or whatever it is. It can be the Siddhi of a mantra. So when you repeat the mantra long enough, you reach its perfection or its completion, after which there is nothing more it can give you. That is when you have acquired the full power of that mantra or the deity that the mantra refers to, and so on. But here is a general term, and in the yoga tradition there is a reference specifically to 8 Siddhis. Sri Aurobindo puts these Siddhis in the context of the supramental aspect of the yoga. They are not powers of the vital, they are not powers of the physical nor of the mental, as normally we would have expected. So you see, for example, a Siddhi to have a specific power, just as an example, you say you materialize an object. The Siddhi would be typically seen as a vital power and often acquired by some contract with a vital being which does the materialization. You do nothing, you just pay it back in some form energetically, and that's called a Siddhi. So our idea of Siddhis is generally of a very low grade and of a vital grade. Sri Aurobindo unusually puts it in the context of a facet of yoga which is towards the supramental, and we have to understand why. This is very interesting to appreciate, and so I'm going to read from various passages from Sri Aurobindo, from the record of yoga itself, as well as from one of his letters. First, I'll start with a letter where he describes how he and the mother have worked on themselves and experimented intensely on the basis of evidence. So, yoga, like science, is an evidence-based framework. That is, it's not fantasy, it's not speculation, it's applied psychology, is the term Sri Aurobindo, phrase Sri Aurobindo uses. Yoga is nothing but applied psychology. He says that in the synthesis of yoga. But the application has to be tested like a scientist, except the domain is not in the material world but in the psycho-spiritual domains. So I read from the letter of Sri Aurobindo dated 30th August 1932. And obviously in response to someone who has doubts and who says, oh, this is, I don't know what's real, what is fantasy, how can you be so sure? So he says, I must remind you that I have been an intellectual myself and no stranger to doubts. Both the mother and myself have had one side of the mind as positive and as insistent on practical results, and more so than any Russell can be. We could never have been contented with the shining ideas and phrases which a Roland or another takes for gold coin of truth. So there are many philosophers who will speculate, and a beautiful idea is all that for them represents a higher truth. So that has no value for Sri Aurobindo and the mother. It has to have a practical value, result, change. So we know very well what is the difference between a subjective experience and a dynamic, outward going and realizing force with a capital F. So dynamic, it is in movement, it is outward going, it's not just something developed inside, and it has to realize something in material circumstances, in the world. Otherwise, it just remains a subjective thing, belonging to some other part of consciousness, let's say, or even some other world, but having no real physical result or value. So, although we have faith, and whoever did anything great in the world without having faith in his mission or the truth at work behind him, so, although we have faith, we do not found ourselves on faith alone, but on a great ground of knowledge which we have been developing and testing all our lives, both Mother and Sri Aurobindo, independently initially and then together. I think I can say, so now he is referring to his own because he can't say too much about the mother, but it would apply equally to the mother. But he says for himself, I think I can say that I have been testing day and night for years upon years, more scrupulously than any scientist his theory or his method on the physical plane. So more scrupulously than a scientist on the material plane. So testing day and night. Now when you say day and night, it's not just an exaggeration as human beings tend to. Sri Aurobindo is very precise. He is actually testing not only in daytime but in nighttime also. And the evidence for that we find in the record of yoga, that he was actually doing that. So you'll see the work that happens in the dream state, in the sleep state, in trance state, night or day irrespective. And the kind of precision we will be exploring through glimpses. It is too comprehensive, too large to explore in full detail. But we will be getting glimpses over the next few weeks. And this month being Sri Aurobindo's birthday month, it's appropriate that we explore this aspect of him more deeply. So, testing day and night for years upon years, more scrupulously than any scientist his theory. How many years? So you can say technically Sri Aurobindo's intense yoga begins 1905, already while he was in the political space. But at some point the politics overwhelms the intensity of his yoga, and the yoga itself undergoes almost a halt. That's when he gets the Adesh from Sri Krishna, now you need to withdraw. And he's unable to withdraw. He says, who will look after this if I let go? And that's when he is jailed. And in jail he asks Krishna, why I was doing so much? Krishna says, you could not let go of your attachment, so I broke your chains of attachment so that you can do the yoga. And subsequently he goes into this extremely intense phase. Having come to Pondicherry, it is a 24-hour business. The yoga itself is a 24-hour dedication. And we'll get glimpses of that as we read subsequently. Then he says, that is why I am not alarmed by the aspect of the world around me, or disconcerted by the often successful fury of the adverse forces, who increase in their rage as the light comes nearer and nearer down to the field of earth and matter. So because the light is coming down and something radical is imminent already, the forces which want to oppose that, they go into intense fury and do everything they can to oppose. And that's why the stress of forces is also much more intense. The collision and pressure that we experience and circumstances in the world is far more intense. People ask, well, why is this happening? Because of this. The light descending provokes a stronger response by the adverse forces. Both now are on the extreme, each pushing against each other. That's the pressure. There's a lady I had once met, and she was fascinated by Sri Aurobindo initially, and then she let go of Sri Aurobindo's yoga and went to some other tradition for two reasons. One was her own sense of egoism and self-importance, but the other reason she gave me was, she said, Sri Aurobindo says the supermind is descending, but then why is the world getting worse and worse? So that was for her a contradiction. But you have to understand, precisely because it is descending, because the light is not just imminent in its fulfillment here, it's already acting upon circumstances and changing them, that the opposing forces enter this condition of fury, and often successful fury, who increase in their rage as the light comes nearer and nearer down to the field of earth and matter. Then he says, if I believe in the probability and not only the possibility, if I feel practically certain of the supramental descent, I do not fix a date. It is because my grounds for the belief, not merely a faith in the air. I know that the supramental descent is inevitable. I have faith in view of my experience that the time can be and should be now and not in a later age. My experience, not a fantasy, not a speculation, not a hope, not a possibility. Experience, and we must really cling to this word. There are many, and this will be part of the discussion we will have later, who have speculated and questioned, did Sri Aurobindo even attain the supermind? And that's one of the things I wanted to discuss in the sessions today and tomorrow, but we'll keep that for about a month later. So, experience he talks of. And then he says, and even if I knew it to be for a later time, I would not swerve from my path or be discouraged or flag in my labor. Formerly, I might have been, but not now, after all the path I have traversed. So again, it's built on the experience. Having gone through all this, it's clear. When one is sure of the truth, or even when one believes the thing one pursues to be the only possible solution, one does not stipulate for an immediate success. One travels towards the light, capital L, taking as well worths, facing every risk of the adventure. So if you're sure of the truth, or if you believe that the thing one pursues is the only possible solution, what do? You just keep at it, isn't it? Even if the success is not immediate, well, you keep working for it. And you should be willing to face every risk of the adventure, because it's the only truth. So, still, like you, it is now in this life that I insist on it, and not in another or in the hereafter. So there's another letter of him which is also in the 1932 November. He says, we should hope that it will happen in this decade itself, in the early part of the decade, not the later part of the decade. That's the kind of imminence that was there at that point already. November 24th, 1932. Now this is the background of the practice that he went through as a scientist doing his experiments in the physical domain, but now in the psychospiritual domain. Now you must understand, it is not in the psychospiritual domain an abstraction. It is as tangible a reality as the physical is to the physical body. You have to appreciate, for example, and this is felt quite vividly, when you go out of the body in those worlds, they have an objectivity of their own. You can, Mother explains, you can build something, for example, in the overmental realm, construct it, come back to your earth body, spend a few days, and then go out of the body and again go back to the same thing, and the thing is there. It not only continues to exist, it impacts all other planes through the construction you've made. And it's a real construction, tangible to that consciousness meeting that object. And so through all the planes of consciousness. So when he's speaking of working in this psychospiritual domain like a scientist, they are tangible results with tangible consequences on the material plane. Remember, the goal is always that it must have a result here. So when we speak of the Siddhis, which is going to be the special theme for today, it is also with this intention. You acquire a tangible capacity, but with the consequence here on earth in material life. And to perfection, if possible, isn't it? Otherwise it's not a Siddhi. So this is going to be our special exploration, but all the rest will be along this line of how Sri Aurobindo worked in himself, on himself, and through him upon the world and on people and on circumstances, as part of the yoga for the earth, for humanity, and of course for the divine, but for humanity equally, as he was working in himself and through him on humanity. So this is the background for what we are entering as exploration. Now when we come to the Siddhis proper, as I said, Sri Aurobindo puts them in a very different framework. He puts them in relation to the supermind. And yet everything we know about Siddhis are typically of a vital nature. So how is that? And this we understand more profoundly when we look at the nature of Siddhis. Essentially what are they? If you say something like telepathy or telekinesis or clairaudience, clairvoyance, whatever, extension of all the senses, extension of your ability to act, to perceive, etc. What are they essentially? They are breaking boundaries of our limited consciousness. At first, breaking boundaries of our physical sense organs. So I see things which are beyond my physical range of sight. I hear things which are beyond. Not only in range physically, maybe I see something which is in the next room, in the next building, in the next city, in the next planet. Somehow at some point distance doesn't seem to matter. But also I can see what is in the past or in the future. And then comes a greater complication, because what is in the past, you can of course accept, yes, it happened, so maybe you can see it. But what is in the future, how can you see? Because the future is not decided. And so we get into a lot of complexities there. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing possibilities? Are you seeing certainties? And again, in the seeing, there are all these gradations and variations, which would make the seeing perfect or imperfect or partial. So you see the breaking down of barriers of space and then of time, and then with it also of range. So when you see beyond, it will be colors also of a greater range. It will be qualities and capacities of a different kind, of which there is no physical equivalent. You will see other worlds. So this is one range of, let's say, Siddhis. There will be another which will be of exercising influence over them, not just perceiving but actually acting upon them. So immediately you see the sense of the Siddhi is the breaking out of boundaries of the physical senses and consciousness. Then the moment you break out, where are you entering? A domain which is more vital and mental. But there might be equivalent of higher levels. So our tendency is to view from below upwards. I just released a physical boundary, so I experienced something greater. But why is this greater possible? Because there is something much higher, more essentially true, always existent in the divine consciousness, of which this is a diminished representation in the vital level, and which in the physical body becomes even more diminished. So rather than seeing bottom up, if you see from the origin down, then you will understand the true nature of Siddhi. And this is what Sri Aurobindo does. The perfection of the Siddhi in the context of the integral yoga is not merely this release from his physical limitations. It is the attainment to the way the divine perceives, the way the divine acts from top down, of which the vital grade of Siddhi would actually be an inferior action. And the spiritual grade is the true Siddhi. So now when we are going to use the word Siddhis, we are not going to use them in the conventional sense, even though the wording may correspond to well-known Siddhis in the yoga tradition, the names may correspond, but Sri Aurobindo shows you not them in their vital operation, but in their operation of the higher spiritual consciousness, of which vital will be a reduced version. Okay, so this is the background now. Sri Aurobindo explains, and I'm going to read now from his description in the Sapta Chatushtaya. Ashta Siddhi, 8 Siddhis. Ashta is 8 in Sanskrit. There are 2 Siddhis of knowledge, 3 of power, and 3 of being. So totally 8. Why? See, with Sri Aurobindo you go to fundamentals. If you read in the yoga tradition, oh, there are 8 Siddhis, I would ask why? Why not 9? Why not 10? Well, why not 7? 7 is a nice number, right? There should be 7 Siddhis. Why 8? So, Sri Aurobindo will actually tell you why. And then where they come from, why they even exist. So, all Siddhis exist already in nature. They exist in you. We all have them right now. We're just not capable, we're not conscious, we're not able to operate in them or in the consciousness to which they correspond. So, they exist in you. Only owing to habitual limitations you make a use of them which is mechanical and limited. Your use is mechanical and limited by habit. Interesting. If you can get free of that habit or change that habit, get out of the mechanical and limited operation, you will actually discover, hey, it's actually there in me. And I'm actually using it, but using it to such a reduced grade that you do not realize what it is. So, by breaking these limitations, what are the limitations? Habitual limitations, typically, and the mechanical and limited form. By breaking these limitations, one is able to get the conscious and voluntary use of them. So we all have unconscious and involuntary uses. All of us have had some glimpse or other of precognition. You felt something would happen and then it happened. You received a thought or you had an intense wish and it acted on circumstances, etc. But you'd get conscious and voluntary use of them. So, how do you get the 8 Siddhis? First, the 3 Siddhis of being are Siddhis of the Sat or pure substance. So he's going top down. Remember, the reality from top down is that there is the Sat, pure existence of the divine, and then there is the Chit, the consciousness of that existence, and then there is the Ananda, which is the delight of that consciousness and that existence. And they are one. But you have the Sat and then you have the Chit. And in the Chit consciousness, you have 2 aspects, the knowledge aspect and the power aspect. So all Siddhis correspond to these 3 things actually. And they are natural operative states of that consciousness. So, the 3 Siddhis of being are Siddhis of the Sat or pure substance. In matter, now that thing operating in matter, Sat uses these Siddhis according to fixed laws. But in itself it is free to use them as it chooses. So in matter this happens, but it happens in a kind of a mechanical, habitual, routine form which is so structured and so repetitive that you call them laws of nature, laws of matter. But it is actually the Siddhi of the Sat operating in matter in a mechanical and fixed way universally. And so you do not see it as a Siddhi actually. But in itself it is free to use them as it chooses, without this rigid form of working. If one can get partly or entirely this freedom, one is said to have these 3 Siddhis. You see how simple it is. Right here in the material world, the Sat, divine pure substance, existence, is actually using them in a mechanical way. But itself is free to use them any way it wants. It's just using them mechanically. All you need to do is somehow shift your consciousness and partly or entirely align to the freedom of this working which is behind the material working. And there you can tap into it and you have this. I'll give an example here in a domain which is quite understandable for us. You know people who bend spoons, they bend metal basically. And they take the spoon, they look at them, they touch them sometimes, caress them, sometimes without touching them, just concentrating on them. And then suddenly the spoon bends or the metal breaks, etc. And if you ask them, how do you do it? They say, I don't know. It's somehow, there's an intention somewhere, but you have to apply the intention without trying. The more you try, the more you interfere. You have to apply the intention without trying. And when you don't try, then it happens more easily. That's the best you will get. In the training also for this, and it's not difficult, one can train to do this. Some people have a gift, they get it sooner, but everyone can do it under special circumstances. In the training also, the goal is actually to distract your personal intention enough that you don't interfere with the thing happening. So in a sense, you're being told it's happening in a part of you that's able to do it already, but your effort to do interferes with that part's freedom to do it. And now you understand how that works with the explanation Sri Aurobindo gives. If you can get partly or entirely to this freedom, one is said to have these three siddhis. So what are these three siddhis of existence in their working in matter or in their working in pure consciousness? They are Mahima, including Garima, second Laghima, and third Anima. So these are commonly known terms. And Sri Aurobindo explains each of these terms in a certain way, but I'll just generally state them here because here he's not going too much into the detail of these three workings. But it means you are able to take material, for example, and make it light or heavy. Or you're able to perceive inside, as if with a microscope, the inner working and modify the inner working. Or perceive largely and apply your consciousness in a large way to modify the material and so on. So these are abilities which innately are present in the working of matter, but through a process of nature. For example, you heat it, metal becomes soft, for example. Why? That's a siddhi actually. But working through the routine process of nature, you say, it's a law of nature. It's not a law, it's a free working but habitual working. The freedom is now bound inside the habit. You step back and you can take the same metal without applying the heat and make it soft and it bends. That would be the free working, not bound to the habitual form. So we are not going to concentrate on these, but we will rather concentrate on the next two siddhis, which are more interesting, and see examples of those. So this was, remember, Sat. Sat manifests as Chit, pure consciousness. And Chit has two sides, consciousness and energy. That is to say, knowledge and power. So observe in you, when you become conscious, let's say you're conscious of your hand. You feel your hand, you immediately feel the outline of your hand. You feel the sensations of the hand, you feel the temperature, you feel the touch. You have knowledge. But at the same time that you feel, let's say you feel some part of your finger, you notice you have also the power then to move it. So these are the two facets, knowledge aspect which comes from the consciousness and the power aspect which comes from the energy. If you have one, you have the other. You can't have the exercise of power without some degree of the knowledge. You can't have the energy operating, or you can't will the energy or direct it without the consciousness of the energy. So between these there's a certain relationship. The more you become conscious, the more you acquire the power. Now if this is true in your physical body, it is true of everything. Everywhere that there is consciousness, and everything being essentially consciousness. So again, if you go back to that example of the metal bending, if you could become conscious of the metal, in the metal, as the metal, there you could imprint a will and perhaps modify that. That would be the method, so to say. So, but we continue now. Consciousness in one material being communicates with the same consciousness in another material being by certain fixed methods, such as speech, gesture, writing, etc. The unconscious mental communication. So we are speaking, I speak words, I write, I make gestures, you see those gestures, hear the words, see the text, and you understand. Now he is calling this unconscious mental communication. Why? Because my mind is converted into symbols. You pick up symbols and translate it into your mind. Except if the symbols misalign, you have a different sense of those words, you will have a miscommunication. So that's how you get innuendo and misunderstandings. Because you never knew my thought and I never knew your thought. We had to go down through this unconscious processes. But, he says, but these limitations are mere habits and other methods are possible. As, for instance, ants communicate by touch and not by speech. So it's something interesting Sri Aurobindo has said in many different places. If you observe ants in a line, as one line, some ants go in one direction, others are returning. Every now and then two ants will stop, they will touch and then move on. Again they will touch and move on, touch, move on. And that's the communication. They don't talk, they don't make signals through touch. Bees, you will see, have a different way of communication. A bee has just found a flower at a distance. It flies straight back to the hive, which is amazing already. You remember, it's been wandering, and up to a kilometer or two it can go, more than a mile or two, wandering around. Suddenly it discovers a flower. From the point it has found the flower, it comes straight back to the hive. It knows exactly where the hive was without a GPS system. After wandering for hours, comes straight back to the hive. Then it enters the hive and does what is called the bee dance. And in the dance it will move forward, flap its wings, move forward, go backward, flap wings, and all the other bees circle it and watch. And then suddenly they all take off from the hive and fly straight to the direction of the flowers and reach there. So by some pattern in its dance, the bee is communicating which direction to go and at what distance to go, and what kind of flower or what kind of experience is there. Now if you think about all these kinds of communications, and sometimes elephants have unusual communications with sound which is subsonic. Whoa. And it is so low in sound we cannot hear as human beings. But it travels up to 10 kilometers sometimes. And they communicate. Whales can communicate with whale songs across oceans, from Pacific Ocean to Atlantic Ocean, with massive landmass in between, and yet they communicate. And then they sing similar songs. What are they communicating? We don't even know. So what he's showing you is these limitations with which we have the unconscious mental communication are merely habits. And there are other methods also for such communications. But true communication is the direct contact. So he says, consciousness in itself is free to communicate between one mind and another without physical means, consciously and voluntarily. So if you're sitting with a close friend, and we have all had this experience, you start narrating something, maybe words, gestures, and there's a point where you feel a synchronization of mind, emotional consciousness, in which the other feels and knows exactly what you're saying, and the words are almost like indicators to confirm that what I'm feeling is correct, or to guide a little bit the direction of the feeling. You've had this experience. All of us have had this. Except that we don't realize that at that point there's actually a direct contact of consciousness and direct transmission. If you are used to the habitual unconscious mental communication, then you're still too focused on the words and you have misunderstanding. If you're used to tuning in on this level, despite the words you can sense what is intended behind the words and you don't have misunderstandings. And you will notice some of the best negotiators, some of the best therapists, and most people with a refinement of mind and development of mind can sense this in the other. And if you can sense, remember, knowledge is power. Knowledge would not only give you the ability to perceive, to sense, but also to influence. We'll come to that shortly. But this ability, once you have, something very interesting happens. You notice distance doesn't matter. You can be chatting with someone on a video call, and there's a tuning in initially. At some point when the link, the synchronization has happened, despite the words, despite a bad connection, you sense what the person is saying. You can tune in, and the words are not so important, and this connection forms. I remember reading a description in a book which was called Rolling Thunder. The author was Doug Boyd, and he was with a Red Indian medicine man, Native American, and this was a man of some development with unusual siddhis, and he watched him speaking to an elder of the tribe. And while he was narrating the events of a particular public program he had been to, as he was talking, his voice became softer and softer, and his eyes half closed, the other man's eyes half closed, and they were both as if in a half sleepy state, and the speech was barely heard. And so this man thought they've both gone to sleep, or they don't know what, he didn't know what was happening. And then when he finished, the other man, the elder, opened his eyes fully, came out of his sleep-like state, and then started asking very precise and accurate questions. He had heard everything, understood everything, and had actually understood more deeply than the words spoken. So here is an example of two people who have this ability consciously using verbal communication, but dimming the verbal, using it only as a support, and linking in consciousness for a more complete transmission. Now, why is this so important? And of course, you can use it purely from the point of view of siddhi to influence or to sense. But for us, there's another more deep use. It is because when you read Sri Aurobindo, all of us have this experience that you tune in something to the consciousness, but to the experience behind. And it is on this level that Sri Aurobindo transmits into you the experience of what he is writing. If you develop this capacity, and we all have it innately, but if you consciously develop it, you can receive the influence of that experience which he is giving you as he describes the experience. This is extremely important as a capacity, and he has the power to transmit. You only have to develop a little bit more your receptivity. We also have the receptivity. It's just a little more that you have to develop. So, I'm coming back to the text. It's a slight digression. The consciousness in itself is free to communicate between one mind and another without physical means, consciously and voluntarily. The two siddhis by which this is done are called Vyapti and Prakamya. Now remember, consciousness has two aspects, pure consciousness has two aspects, knowledge and power, okay, consciousness and energy. These are siddhis of consciousness, and then there are siddhis of power, which are complementary. So let's look at this first. In the same way, there is a power in the consciousness. So this was knowledge, now is the power. There is a power in the consciousness of acting upon other conscious beings, or even upon things without physical means or persuasion or compulsion. So even on things and on persons, you can use physical means. I can pull you, drag you and force you to do something, or I can persuade you with a lot of pressures or rewards or punishment, or by compulsion, by threat. None of these are needed. You can make it happen to a person or a thing. So he gives an example. Great men are said to make others do their will by a sort of magnetism. That is to say, there is a force in their words, in their action, or even in their silent will or mere presence, which influences and compels others. So the force which compels, and that may use words or may not use words, may use simply presence, and it acts. Silent will, and it acts. To have these siddhis of power is to have the conscious and voluntary use of this force of Chit. So some people have it, again innately, you notice, they do it, not always consciously, sometimes consciously, but they don't know how they do it. If you ask them, how do you do it? I don't know, I just intend it, I will it, and I feel the power, and people respond. That's pretty much how these magnetic people will communicate. You have it consciously and voluntarily. The three powers are Aishwarya, Ishita, Vashita. So now we have covered 8 in all. 2 of knowledge, 3 of power. These powers can only be entirely acquired or safely used when we have got rid of egoism, capital E. and identified ourselves with the infinite will and the infinite consciousness. So you can acquire them, you can use them, but not safely. Because inevitably your ego sense will seize upon them, which is what happens with many of these great men who are driven by a strong vital force. Inevitably they end up exercising it for personal interest, personal use, and of course with consequences which correspond to that. But if you identify yourself with the infinite will, capital W, and infinite consciousness, capital C, generally speaking, a higher divine consciousness, and you've got rid of the egoism. Not ego, but egoism. Egoism is the constant reference to yourself. Ego is the sense of separation. So you may still feel separate, but you don't obsess with I need, I want, so I will do. You are perceiving there is a larger need, a more impersonal understanding. This needs to be done even if I don't like it. Even if it is to my disadvantage, it's the right thing to be done. And then already your egoism is thinned. And if at that point you're looking at things from a higher perspective, again it need not be perfectly aligned to the divine will, but just a higher evolutionary sense, and you say, well, this needs to be done, and I don't like it, I'm going to lose in the process, but it needs to be done, I'm going to do it. Already there, you are in a position where you can begin to safely exercise these capacities. Obviously, it will be complete when you have identified with the divine will and the divine consciousness. But see, he uses the word not divine, he says infinite will and infinite consciousness. Why? So the infinite will is the exercising power, infinite consciousness is the perceiving. But why infinite? Because it looks at the whole. It doesn't have to be divine, doesn't necessarily have to be of a higher consciousness. But it needs to be a consciousness which sees the whole, which sees things from the perspective of infinity. And already there you can safely utilize this. And your egoism is got rid of, at least thinned. These powers, they are sometimes employed by mechanical means, for example, with the aid of mantras, tantric kriyas, special processes, etc. So in a sense, this is what's happening when you use these kinds of special processes, use of mantras or tantric techniques. Kriya is any technique. The word kriya means technique. So there are techniques, you'll find formulas, people will say do this, do that, make this offering, draw this picture, go through this sequence, and you'll get specific results, or repeat this mantra so many times and you'll get the results, etc. So these are mechanical means for the same thing, for the same operation, but they are not the conscious use of those powers. They are not the free voluntary use of those powers. Now what are these? And he's going to elaborate these Sanskrit terms. Remember the first two siddhis by which consciousness is able to perceive, vyapti and prakamya. These are the two words he used. And then three of power. So we'll look at the first two. Vyapti is when the thoughts, feelings, etc. of others or any kind of knowledge of things outside yourself are felt coming to the mind from those things or persons. You feel the knowledge coming. It enters you. Thoughts, feelings, or generally knowledge of things outside. Again, it's not something difficult. We all have this ability, remember. So you go to a marketplace. Let's say you've been in a quiet space with practically no one around you. You feel very quiet, calm, clear. Your mind at best is full of your thoughts. From there you go to a market space. Hundreds of people with all kinds of strong emotions and desires, pulling, pushing, craving, buying, selling, trying to seize upon you, or desperate to sell or buy. You enter the space and you sense immediately an assault of energies, thoughts, feelings, emotions, typically. That assault is this. Very simple experience, we all have it. But we experience it when it is strong and intense. But the same sensitivity when you develop, you experience it everywhere at all times with even fine things. Even with one person in front of you. Or sometimes even a person who's far away from you. So coming to the mind from things or people. This is the power of a receptive vyapti. There is also a power of communicative vyapti. When you can send or put your own thought, feeling, etc. into someone else. So this is vyapti, receptive and communicative. What is this putting a power into somebody else? Again, you go to a shop, the fellow who's trying to sell to you, he says, try this is so good. And there's a first response in you which says, no, I don't want it. But the man says, but this is so good, you will really like it. And something has as if entered into you and hooked into you, and you feel a tug. I just said no, but I look again. Maybe, should I? Perhaps not, but I don't want. But maybe, yes, please take it, it's so good, you will really enjoy so much, you'll be so happy. And at some point I say, okay, I take. What happened? I will say, oh, he convinced me with his words. No, he didn't. Not with words. He hooked into you energetically and pulled you to this. Changed your poise, changed your state of consciousness, exercised an influence on your feelings and your thoughts. Generally here in this case it is feelings. Tugged at your heart emotions, and life force. So it's the power of communicative vyapti. When you can send or put your own thought and feeling into someone else. Now, in some way, we are doing this all the time. You're trying to convince somebody, you are actually consciously, unconsciously projecting your thoughts, feelings, interests, intentions, will into somebody else. If you're effective, you have a result. Or if the other person is conscious or unconscious, depending on their receptivity or the ability to be swayed, you have a result. But we are doing this all the time, it's just we are not conscious. It was one of the reasons why when somebody asked the mother, what is occultism, or how do you practice occultism? She said, every time you have a strong thought or emotion, you are practicing occultism, except you're not conscious of what it is you're doing. So this is one. There's an interesting footnote to this, which apparently exists in one of the disciples' notebooks, where after this line there's a whole further paragraph, but which is not seen in other people's notebooks. This is copied from what Sri Aurobindo said or wrote. So, there in that text, Sri Aurobindo apparently has said that what is happening above also happens below. And what the Chit Shakti reveals in the spirit, the creative power here, Maya Shakti, crudely and materially attempts in the material and mental universes. So, spiritual communism of Vijnana has its shadow in the material and the Bolshevik communism, and the Siddhis of the Vijnana are attempted in wireless telegraphy, broadcasting, telephone and image transcription, television in today's vocabulary. So you understand something quite fascinating here, that the Siddhis in their pure operation in the higher Vijnana domain, let's say, reflect on the lower plane through technological processes. We attain to the same thing. That's what your telephone, television, etc. are. And that's what social media is doing to you, effectively utilizing these powers to influence you, isn't it? So using the communicative vyapti. Now this was vyapti, remember, you feel things coming into you or you project something into others. Prakamya is the other word he used. Prakamya is when you look mentally or physically at somebody or something and perceive what is in that person or thing. Thoughts, feelings, facts about them, etc. So you look at the person, you feel what is their thought happening, what is the feeling they are undergoing, and even in specific information. Or the person has just been to such and such a place, or just done such and such a thing, or is going through this particular problem currently. You look at them and you perceive this. There is also another kind of prakamya, which is not of the mind but of the senses. It is the power of perceiving smells, sounds, contacts, tastes, lights, colors, and other objects of sense which are either not at all perceptible to the ordinary man or beyond the range of the ordinary senses. So you have a prakamya where you can smell or taste or touch or perceive lights or images also of things which are beyond the physical sense. So I'm going to give a few examples of both of these prakamyas. But you see the difference between vyapti and prakamya. Vyapti was a spontaneous reception felt within you without your intending to. It is almost like an empathic response because you're one with the whole. or in the oneness with the whole, you receive and perceive. Prakamya is when there is a projection with an interest and intention entering into that domain. Okay, so this distinction is important. I'll dwell upon it a little later, but let's look at this example of prakamya now. You meet somebody and the person is saying something. The person looks a little troubled. What is the problem? And as if a part of you kind of enters. What's happening inside? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Why are they bothered? And suddenly you pick something. Oh, perhaps this has happened. Now, if you're a diagnostic therapist, doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, you have to have this ability, without which you cannot sense what is happening inside another behind their appearances of words. So often if you have this skillfully, and I have met a few who have the ability, you walk into the room and the person is already sensing things behind. And they're waiting for you to talk about it. They already know what you're going to say, or at least the direction in which it's going to go. And so already there you notice, there again the other side, if you can perceive, you can also insert and influence. But also smells, sounds, contacts and tastes, how does that work? I'll give an example here. You must have seen when you enter a food space, of course the smell hits you, you might salivate. But sometimes without the smell hitting you, you look at an object at a distance and you can almost as if already taste it or smell it. Particularly with food, it can be behind a glass box, but you can taste it. I met, for example, a chef, very developed, very skillful in his capacity. And he used to say, I can look at the food and tell you what you have made, what you have put in it and how it's going to taste. I will say, oh, he's such an expert. Through years of experience looking at the food, he's picking up some fine nuances of indication. No. It is this capacity of prakamya. A part of your consciousness projects, touches, senses, and perceives, even tastes. So again, it's an ability which can be further developed, but you have giving examples of how we already have something of it. It's as if a part of you projects, substance of your consciousness projects like a thread, tendril, goes out, touches, sees, senses, knows, tastes, smells, etc. So Vyapti is more like being in a mirror where the thing outside reflects in you. Prakamya is more as a projection going out, perceiving, projection of consciousness. That's the distinction between the two. In both cases, you can also go back and forth. Remember, if you're conscious, you can also modify. So, this is our first example of, or a first exploration of this aspect. We're going to see examples of Sri Aurobindo exercising the Vyapti, Prakamya, as well as the exercise of powers in a few things shortly. Now, we have looked at Vyapti and Prakamya. These were powers, remember, of knowledge, of consciousness. What about the other aspect of energy, which is power? Remember, that has 3 Siddhis associated. And we saw their names, Aishwarya, Ishita and Vashita. What are these? So he explains in the same text. Vashita is when you concentrate your will on a person or object so as to control it. In vocabulary which is quite common if you are familiar with Indian languages or with the Sanskrit, Vashikarana is to capture somebody in the grip of your will. Okay, so there's actually a term used when you say somebody is hypnotized. That means Vashikarana is the term used to grip somebody in your will. So you concentrate your will on a person or object so as to control it, seize upon and control them. So this is an active poise, your consciousness reaching out, your will reaching out to control. You'll see the 3 gradations are less and less intrusive. So the next one is Aishwarya. Aishwarya is when you merely use the will without any such concentration or control, and things happen or people act according to that will. So it's not a wish, you say, this has to happen. But I don't exercise a concentration or reach out to control this, and it's a general will placed without concentration of the specifics or detail. And people, things, circumstances tend to move in that direction. This is Aishwarya, lordship. The term itself translates as lordship. Vashi is attraction, Aishwarya is lordship. The third word is Ishita, deriving from Ichha, desire. So here is the least intrusive. Ishita is when you do not will, but merely have a want or need, or a sense that something ought to be, and that thing comes to you or happens. So you're sitting, you're not even exercising a will, I have a need. And the need reflects, this needs to be done, this has to happen, this is required. And there's a rippling out and things happen. To give an example of the mother's life, my teacher MP Pandit narrated so many times it would happen. Mother liked something and they would try to get them. So once he saw that mother liked felt pens, so he had asked somebody to bring felt pens, they had brought, and he was taking them to the mother. And as soon as he entered the mother's room, she turned to him with a broad smile and said, "Oh, they have come." So Panditji said, "How did mother know?" She said, they came and told me that we have come. She needed it, and there was this ripple that took place in people around her. They made the whole effort, they got the thing came, and even the felt pens which came reached out to her and said, "We have come, you needed, here we are." She didn't have to say, "Get me some." Just the need, and it happened. And so much of the influence that Sri Aurobindo and the mother had on circumstances was at this level. So in the receptive portions of humanity, and particularly people around them who were open and receptive, it was easy because they were open to that influence. And in this way, he would also exercise a will to influence people in their sadhana. The mother would exercise an intention to shape their sadhana. Just like that. Just by being it, just by being aware of it, just by holding them in her consciousness. You don't have to do anything. This is Ishita. In Aishwarya, he or she would exercise a will in addition, and then that will would intervene. So, where there's a resistance, perhaps a push of a will. But still the will is put, and then you can disengage, the will itself continues. In Vashita, the will is followed with a concentration and a certain intensity to sustain, to hold, to push, to break for a very precise, specific outcome, often required against resistance. So now these 3 degrees of mastery or over circumstances, exercise of power of the Chit, of Sat consciousness. And this is why these are divine powers, these are the mechanisms by which the divine will operates in the universe, and you, so to say, as if aligned to that and exercise this. Now you can see how this same thing could be replicated on a mental level or a vital level and would represent an inferior operation of the same faculty. And so the same words are used in the yoga tradition often at that level. So the other 3 words, remember the power of existence. Remember Mahima, Laghima, Anima. Of this now Sri Aurobindo explains in this text. Mahima is unhampered force in the mental power or in the physical power. In the physical, it shows itself by an abnormal strength which is not muscular and may even develop into the power of increasing the size and weight of the body, etc. So it's sometimes difficult to appreciate what that means. In the life of, I have spoken of one saint called Tapasviji who lived for 182 years. In his life, there's a certain phase towards the end of his life where he was living in immersion in Brahman consciousness. There was a point where they were traveling by bullock cart and the cart had got stuck in mud. And every effort they made to pull out the wheels from the mud failed. So finally they told him, "We are unable to move, the bullocks, the humans, all combined together is unable to get you out from this place we are stuck." So he gets down from the cart and goes to the wheel and places his hand on the wheel and says, "Brahman," and just pushes the wheel and it rolls. If you look at it purely from muscular strength, he was the least compared to others, in a sense. So it's not muscular, but abnormal strength developed into the power of increasing the size and weight of the body also. In contrast, Laghima, Mahima is greatness, largeness. Laghima is smallness, littleness. So it's almost as if the complementing power. Laghima is a similar power of lightness. That is to say, of freedom from all pressure or weighing down in the mental, pranic or physical being. By Laghima, it is possible to get rid of weariness, exhaustion and to overcome gravitation. It is the basis of Utthapana, which is lifting, literally, meaning levitation. So, get rid of weariness, exhaustion and overcome gravitation. In contrast, power of increasing size and weight of the body, abnormal strength which is not muscular, and tremendous unhampered mental power or physical power. So, remember, he is describing all these not only at a physical level but also pranic and mental levels. So, lightness in the mental and pranic or physical. Similarly, unhampered power in the mental, vital or physical, etc. So, the operation itself could be on these three levels and it would be different, and the scope of the operation we see includes even full freedom from gravitation, weariness or exhaustion. Again, I give an example. Some of these I might have narrated before, but it's always worth repeating, even, and many of you might not have known. There's this example of a gift that the mother wanted to send to the king of Nepal by post. And so the books were packed, they were taken to the post office, and the person there said, "Oh, it's too heavy, you have to split it into two." Now, we normal human being fools would have said, "All right, we open the packet, make 2 packets and send." Fortunately, in those days, people knew that it was not just a gift sent, there was behind it a force. So the person went right back to the mother and said, "Mother, they are asking for us to divide it into 2. Mother said, "No, bring the packet here." So the packet was brought, she concentrated on it, and then said, first she asked, "How much does it have to weigh? What's the limit?" So they told her what the limit was. She concentrated on the packet and said, "Now take it back and weigh it." So the fellow takes it exactly as it is, takes it to the weighing machine, and now it weighs exactly what it's supposed to be on the limit. And the packet was sent. What did she do? She exercised this power. On herself she could have done, but on an object of Laghima. How? Well, that's the beauty of it. It's actually a faculty natural to consciousness, to existence of the consciousness, the Sat power. Sat and not the Chit. It's an aspect of Sat. And if that were exercised on her own body, it would be the same thing. But on her own body, it would be freeing the body from weariness and exhaustion. We'll come to a few examples of that. So, but just to complete the discussion about the gift packet, well, it was because simply had it gone in a split form, it would have also, the force would have been split symbolically, and it would have spiritual consequences, likely of splitting even the country. We have to understand what was behind these things. These were momentous events. When the mother sent something, even materially, it had profound symbolism. So those who knew it at least were careful. So we come to example of Sri Aurobindo in the Laghima aspect, for example, and would lead eventually, it's the basis of Utthapana, of levitation. So in the jail, when Sri Aurobindo was practicing pranayama at a particular time, the story was that the jailer saw him levitating. Sri Aurobindo said, no, it was not actually a full levitation. It's just that the body had become so light that it could hold itself in an abnormally tilted position, but it had not acquired full levitation. So that tilted position, as if he was floating in midair, but with one part resting. That is what the jailer saw. But subsequently, during the phase where Sri Aurobindo is doing this, the intense practice of this yoga, his body has acquired this capacity to be utterly free of weariness and exhaustion. And his descriptions, which we will perhaps see as we explore the text of the record of yoga, where he is holding up his arm, so entire arm held up, both arms held up, sometimes a leg or both legs and both arms held up, not for a few minutes, for a few hours at a time, sometimes even 8 hours. And he notes no weariness, no tiredness. Or, let's say in the early stages, he will say things like, there was a slight weariness in the muscles or in the nerves or in the layer of consciousness where this power of the consciousness had not yet been fully established. The fact of Uthapana itself, whether full levitation, whether he did, we do not know. But certainly that capacity was inherent and he didn't need to demonstrate. But there's another incident which is not known and which was narrated to us personally by Kumud Ben, and I think it is not known at all to anybody because it was very private and personal that she narrated. Kumud Ben was mother's personal assistant, whom mother took while she was barely 18. Mother took her and made her her closest assistant, confidant at that point. And so when she first went, it was already, there were all these senior people who were there around the mother, and she was the youngest girl of them, and but mother saw in her, there was a past connection. She was her personal attendant earlier in many of the earlier emanations of the mother, incarnations we might say. So the mother showed her everything, all the work she had to do and every little detail. And then at one point the mother asked her suddenly, she said, "If I fall, can you lift me?" And so Kumud stopped, and before she could answer, before she could think or even answer, mother said, "You know, I can make myself light as a feather or heavy as a stone." When she said that, it's obviously something she had tested on herself. Again, Sri Aurobindo has tested on himself. And these are physical outcomes of a capacity developed and tested and perfected. That at will they could do this not only to their own body, but extend it to any object. Now there was no need to demonstrate, but when it needed to be exercised, it was done. And it could be done in so many ways. It could be done quietly without you knowing anything. Oh, you're having struggle in your body, you're facing this. Well, a little infusion of the consciousness and poof, the thing is changed. Now imagine there are these athletes who are running and the mother is standing there in the sports ground training them or taking notes of their performance. Imagine what was possible there. If the athlete says, "I am so great, I am going to do with my force, with my will, with my effort," of course they perform. What if an athlete said, "Mother, I am yours, I open myself to you, let your force act through me"? Imagine what a difference it would make to their athletic performance. Wow. That was the opportunity that she was giving. Or I will say even she is giving now, if you choose to exercise it. Imagine if people made that little bit of effort. This capacity she can literally infuse into you to get rid of weariness and exhaustion and even overcome gravitation. Of course, she would not push it to that limit, but she would do it to the extent required for you to be able to develop your capacity, your sportsmanship, your skill, etc. So, Mahima, Laghima, these are two we have seen. And the third power of existence, of Sat, is Anima, is the power of freeing the atoms of subtle or gross matter. Subtle matter and gross matter, Sukshma and Sthula. These are terms used for subtle and gross, from their ordinary limitations. Now straight away we are entering a physics which is different. Atoms of gross matter we understand, that's our physics. Atoms of subtle matter, what is that? Interesting. There's actually a subtle physical world. It is physical, but the atoms are subtle. So atoms of subtle matter as distinct from atoms of gross matter, and you are able to apply this power of freeing the atoms. By this power one can get free of physical strain or pain or even make the body as light as one chooses. It is by this power that yogis were supposed to make themselves invisible and invulnerable, or to free the body from decay and death. Interesting. So because you are able to apply, Anima is smallness, you are able to apply an influence at an atomic level, freeing at an atomic level from limitations. So you can free the physical body from strain or pain, make it as light obviously, But it's not just the same as weight change as we discussed earlier with Laghima and Anima, with Laghima and Mahima. This is different. Make yourself invisible or invulnerable or free from decay and death. So it's as if you are able to semi or partially dematerialize, pull back from crude, gross material limitations and bring them to some level of freedom and lightness that even you will not be seen. So it's a kind of a partial dematerialization of some kind, or invulnerable. So you can strike and the body will not get an injury. There's an incident recorded in one of the very early texts which was exploring the domain of the occult side of martial arts. I believe the name of the book was Zen in the Art of Archery, perhaps, but I don't know. One such book at that period, let's put it that way, because I had heard of it in the 1980s. I was still too young to have seen the book in itself, but it was narrated by the teacher. So what she had narrated was, in the book, this master shows a sword. It's a Japanese martial arts master. He shows a sword and takes a piece of wood, and the sword is so sharp, gently placing it on the wood, it cuts right through like butter. It's that sharp. Then he concentrates on his arm, and when he's ready, he asks the other person, this is a Western Occidental writer, to take the sword and strike his arm. And he hits it, and there's only a slight welt of the hit, but no cut. This is an intervention of this kind, where you actually become invulnerable to injury, for example. What happened at the level of the working of the atoms, the normal weakness that they had, they were freed from, and you exercise the ability for them to be invulnerable to that blow, or to free them from the grossness of matter to make them as if semi-invisible, or prevent decay and even death. So this is the power of Anima pushed to its limit. So these are the three powers of existence. They are the powers of materiality in the way it is existing in itself, reflecting now the qualities of Sat. So you see how the Siddhis reflect the nature of consciousness, of existence and of consciousness, and the consciousness aspect and the power aspect of consciousness, Sat and Chit. And now the whole rationale for these powers is so obvious. They are natural capacities of the divine consciousness, now in matter, reflected in matter, working in matter. So this is the background of these 8 Siddhis. Now there are other aspects to the yoga and other powers to be developed we don't look at. We're just looking at the Siddhis. So it's taken us a while to go through the Siddhis. Sri Aurobindo actually explains the justification for the Siddhis. And they are natural powers, they are not miraculous, they are natural workings of the divine consciousness. And he explains how they work in the human consciousness or in yogis, etc. What are their dangers and misuse. So we'll look at that next time. But right now I will read from some examples of his action on people or on circumstances as recorded in the Record of Yoga. And I'm taking the earliest. So Record of Yoga, let's say, from the point he comes to Pondicherry, 1909-10, he has just arrived up to 1914 before the mother comes. That's the period we'll look at primarily now. So 1911. So it's an early phase of the yoga, but is already very advanced. 9th of February, 1911. The 3 entries. First, Aishwaryam. Remember, this is the power of a will put working by itself. Aishwaryam on ant, to give up its object and go back. Done after a short persistence in the forward movement. So the moment he puts that will, the ant is moving. After a hesitation, it drops the object and goes back. Okay. Ishita and Aishwaryam. Ishita, remember, is where you have a need but without exercising a will. And in combination with a will. So Ishita and Aishwaryam, for lessening of Saurin's diarrhea. Saurin is one of the disciples. Fulfilled as soon as made. So Saurin has diarrhea, Sri Aurobindo exercises his intention and immediately it stops. Aishwaryam for rapid restoration of health and strength. Repeated and fulfilled on the 10th, that is from 9th February to 10th in 24 hours. 10th, again Sri Aurobindo is noting. Aishwaryam for Moni to awake. Moni is one of the disciples. Immediate success, the fellow wakes up. Aishwaryam for him to get up and give the tea. Succeeded after a slight resistance lasting 5 to 10 minutes. So Sri Aurobindo puts the will. This guy is, the will is acting, but there's a resistance, there's an inertia, there's something in the nature which is, and after 5 or 10 minutes, he gets up and gives the tea. And then next entry, Aishwaryam for the thought to begin, not begun in spite of struggle for many days. So he puts the Aishwaryam and then he notes begun, it's added later. So what thought? Probably something of a shift in his mind consciousness. Then next entry, Aishwaryam for the dog to shake off its heavy tamas and manifest the new soul. Now this is fascinating. And now imagine this is not a dog but a human being. And you'll see what the effect is. So in the dog he is saying this heavy inertia, and there's something else within it which is some higher inner possibility of the dog's soul. So he puts this will for this heavy tamas to be shaken off and manifest the new soul. And then he writes, rapidly successful, but the tamas still struggles to remain, and the old bhava, temperament will translate, in the face and body persists. The old tendency in the face and body persists. A renewed Aishwaryam, new will he is putting, on the 11th, produces an immediate effect. The dog is doing what it had never done before. He doesn't say what. Now imagine if on a grade of a dog animal, he is able to exercise this kind of a shift. Imagine what it does to a human being who is actually open and eager for the shift to take place and yielding consciously. So that's the kind of exercise of power to shift states in people, etc., which Sri Aurobindo documents this. Again, 11th February. There are 3 days, 9th, 10th and 11th. Aishwaryam of restored health and strength to Saurin succeeds, even the time coming correct. Aishwaryam of particular forms of Siddhi, partly successful. So he puts a will for a particular form of Siddhi within himself. Aishwaryam to stay nausea while eating, immediately successful. Aishwaryam to clear the stomach of disturbance and heaviness by working of Akasha. Akasha is the ether principle. Successful. Okay, so this is sometimes he is working on himself, on changes in his own consciousness. Now comes another example which is quite different. It's again coming back to the dog. February 13th or 14th. Ishita Siddhi. Remember, Ishita is the general intention, wish, need, not even a will put. For the dog to eat bread which it had always refused. Suddenly it began eating with relish after first refusing. Next, Ishita, again the same. To refrain from a large piece of bread given, but eat others. Persistently refrained even when it was broken into small pieces, except when induced to think it was not the same. So this is very interesting. He puts a will on the dog to refuse to eat the large piece of bread, but he will eat everything else. So the dog refuses to eat the large bread. Then the person breaks the large bread into smaller pieces, the dog still refuses. At that point, Sri Aurobindo projects the thought in the dog, now this is not the same piece. And so then happily the dog eats up the smaller pieces. Now you see the level of intervention, precision, control, and the psychology that one is watching working inside the dog. And these are just a few examples he has noted at an early stage of the sadhana. Remember, at the same time he is observing what is happening inside them, in the dog, in the people around him. Remember, there is the other aspect of vyapti and prakamya, where he perceives, senses. So some spontaneously he knows their internal state, some he dwells upon, hey, what's happening inside this fellow, and he perceives. And that's happening around of all the people. And then he intervenes by these interventions of will to modify something, change something, modify a behavior, and he's seeing how human nature responds, what kind of resistance it offers. So dog is an example of something which is subhuman but still has this kind of precise response. And then he makes a note. Previously, many Ishitas had succeeded but were not noted down, especially with regard to Vyapti of yogic states. Vyapti is that perception of yogic states or realizations into others or to people coming or not coming. So he is not noted down because he's intervening to imprint yogic states in people who are coming to him or who are not coming also, but they had said they might come. So he's intervening to infuse a yogic state in them. And he's observing the result of those interventions of his will. And again in the next few there are examples where he puts an Aishwaryam of S sovereigns, regularity in the afternoon. He puts a will for him to become more regular, and the man now changes his behavior and becomes more regular. And then some Aishwaryams fulfilled in half an hour. Then on 18th February he notes, the same Aishwaryam fulfilled under adverse circumstances. They sat down to cards at 4 within quarter of an hour. So he's making them do things which are contrary to their nature and contrary to their normal patterns of habit, and able to modify the habit patterns just like that by intending it. So these are some examples noted. There are many others where he intervenes on people who are bringing tea, or there's one example which he narrates. He sees a boy and puts a will. He's watching from the window. He puts a will for the boy to roll up a mat which was lying down. So the boy looks at the mat, hesitates, then moves on. Again, Sri Aurobindo sends a fresh wave of the will. This time the boy stops, looks, comes back, rolls up the mat, puts it away and goes. And then Sri Aurobindo makes a comment, oh, this is typically what happens with the tamasic nature. You have to nudge multiple times. He puts a will while a crow is flying, and the crow changes direction of flight at the moment where the will touches, and so on. So there are many examples of this, and these are very preliminary. Later you will see the same thing applied to things and circumstances much more complex, in collective circumstances, on specific individuals at a distance, verified subsequently through the newspaper, etc. So Viceroy was ill, he puts a will, the Viceroy gets healed, and the next day newspaper notes that there's been a miraculous healing, etc. So I'm going to quickly look at the chat box in case there's something which you have as questions. Shamik asks, what will the body look like when the golden light descends in flesh? Speculative, so we don't really know what it will look like. The form is not important. It is the first thing to focus is the quality of consciousness. And with the liberation of these limitations, what the body can express and do. That is what you should focus, not so much on the form. Soul's Journey says, thank you very much. I find myself pulled sometimes in desperation, wondering if the great predictions of Sri Aurobindo will come true. You often talk of the decline in Auroville, since the masters are gone, new generation distorted or forgot their teaching. What will happen to their knowledge and experience when people still faithful to them will leave their bodies, and only a perverted or forgetful new generation will remain? Is it possible for Sri Aurobindo's works to disappear in the ignorance? Okay, so we are looking at this particular passage, let's say, of Sri Aurobindo's action on disciples and on world circumstances, and the level of precision, perfection and scope of his will and action is so great that despite human resistance, something can still be fulfilled. Only it may take a little longer. What the person has shared as a fear, Hanail is the person's name, what person has shared is valid. Yes, there are people who come with mixed intentions. But know also that there are people who come with the right intentions. And that will always be the case, both in the ashram and in Auroville. And as long as that is there, and I've put it in general terms, as long as there are human beings who have the aspiration and come for the right reasons, or whether they come here or not, they practice elsewhere, for the right reasons, this help, this action will always be there. So you should not worry too much about the mixtures and distortions which may come from mixed people. It would be nice if there was some kind of filter. Always they kept a filter. Sri Aurobindo and the mother kept a filter. We know of cases where they actually said for Auroville such and such a person, no. Mother said clearly no. And even she even said about one person, he will come and spoil the work. And the person later was taken and did spoil the work and was one of the causes for delay in certain important projects in Auroville. So there are also good people. At the end of the day, we are a battleground of forces. And if there are more people who are open to the mother's force and want to serve the divine will consciously, the balance will tilt. And it is towards this that we have to move. Don't worry too much about people trying to spoil the work. If there are enough people doing the right thing or aligned to the divine consciousness and the divine will triumph through them, despite whatever difficulties we might have to pass through. So remember also, it's not that Sri Aurobindo made predictions. These are not so much predictions. They are rather descriptions of what are trends and circumstances. Prediction is, it's not like a prophecy, says, oh, one day it will happen. No, he's seeing the trend line, he explains why and how, and he puts a force to intervene and support or counter certain things. So we are talking of something very different. It's not just prophecy. Sagar is asking, is it possible to move objects from one place to another? Like 11 in series Stranger Things. I have not seen the series, but I am familiar with the idea that they have things like that. Yes, it is possible to move objects. And Jessica says Russia has studied telekinesis and teleportation. Yes, and China also has been doing a lot. Particularly what they found was in young children, there is not yet this kind of fixed rigidity of ideas and resistance. So it's much more easy to mold them or awaken in them these natural abilities. And if you tap them early enough, they seem to be able to retain them even into adulthood. And of course, the weaponization was the key for many of the militaries to use these powers. The United States also at a super secret level in the CIA or other programs did experiment with these things. The problem, of course, was that many of these people had conscience, or when they were pushed to exercising these powers for harmful use, either the powers would not function or the people would not function. So the military weaponization has not been so effective. Nevertheless, the research was there. So yes, this can be done. This can also be learnt. I was interested to see how there are people teaching you how to see with eyes closed. And on YouTube there are courses people teach, or they show you how they are teaching young children. And it's not difficult. It's just as easy as that. You just start doing it with faith. And the faith is a key element. So we'll come to that also maybe as we explore things in the record of yoga. So Vaijayanti is asking, can we say that certain amazing ancient temple sculptors used such siddhis for building the temples? Not necessarily, but they did have technologies for softening stone as well as other things for molding, shaping, using physical processes. Some of the technologies are now forgotten or lost. But I don't think they used this level of siddhis for that purpose, at least not in the immediate period. There was a time, and there is more a racial memory of this than a historical memory, where in the previous cycle of the Satya Yuga, there were enough human beings developed to be able to exercise such powers, and they could do such things. So we have stories of great rishis intervening, shaping matter, and overcoming all kinds of things just by willing it and so on. That seems to have been natural during that phase and then was lost. But the point we have to recognize is the innate ability already exists in us, and to be able to tap that and perfect that is one of the secondary goals of the integral yoga, isn't it? Not as a power, but as a freedom of the ability of pure consciousness and existence to act freely, for the divine to act freely through us. Okay. So there's a question, Shanta, is Laghima power used in spaceships? Possible. So there are certain kinds of vehicles where the Siddhis were used to operate them. So only a person with the Siddhi could tap into the working of those vehicles. But again, I don't know how much of that was a combination with technology or without technology. In principle, and we have stories of this kind, where somebody would take an object, recite a mantra, and thus through the mantra exercise the power on the object and make it a vehicle to fly, for example. That sort of thing, yes, has been done. But again, it required a very special kind of development, even in the power of the mantric siddhi, etc. Rampal is asking, how is Ishita different from Aishwarya? Yes, there's a difference. In Aishwarya, there is an active exercise of will. In Ishita, it's just the fact that there is a need. So you're walking, the sun is very hot, you suddenly realize, oh, what if, or I need a shade. And someone is walking by and extends an umbrella over you, and you say thank you. You did not exercise a will. You could at that point say, okay, I need someone to come and give me an umbrella. And you exercise a will, and that would be the Aishwarya part. If you go to Vashita, it would be, here's a person there with an umbrella. I need that person to help me or give me the umbrella or accompany me with an umbrella, and you put an intention with a concentrated will, and that would be the Vashita movement. So you see, the degrees of the three are less and less applied with the personal intervention. Simply in this case, the Ishita, Ichha, desire, simply stated, oh, this is required, and that's it. It starts happening or it happens. Okay, he asks, how is it different in the case of the dog and the bread? So first, Sri Aurobindo would have simply intended it without a will and then intervened with a will or a combination of both. So he documents that level of precision. This is what I wanted to show. That he is conscious where it is shifting from this to that, or if even it's a blend of that. Zen Rain says, I recall an example where he gave someone the experience of the silent mind and the person thought he was going mad and ran away. Yes, that's one example of Sri Aurobindo intervening on a yogic state. But this is a case Sri Aurobindo gives where the person was not ready. The person said, I want to experience silence of mind. Sri Aurobindo says, sit down. And he's reading his newspaper, he says, sit down. And then with his capacity, because he's already living in that consciousness, he infuses into the other person's mind. Suddenly this fellow feels his mind becoming completely silent. And what happens when an untrained mind suddenly experiences silence of thought? In panic, you try to exercise your thought more because you're not used to it. What's happening? Have I gone stupid? I can't think. You panic. Where's my thought? You're so unused to it. It's so new. It's a shock. I've gone stupid. I can't think because I know I'm thinking. That's when I know I'm existing. What happens? So he starts willing his thought. It doesn't happen. It's silence. Rather than saying, wow, this is so wonderful, he panics. And at one point, he's panics so much, he says, I'm going mad. He jumps up and runs away. This is the reason why, though the experience can be infused into you just like that, it's useful to go through a graded process. You experience it, oh wow, that feels nice. Okay, now I need to back off. That's enough. And then after a while you feel a longing. Oh, it would be so nice to be able to have that more. I must make a little more effort. You go into that. Oh, it feels so good. This time I'm going to stay longer. I'll stay as long as I can. But after a while the system tires. And again the old thoughts and patterns come back when I'm tired. I wish I could keep that all the time. And so you go back and forth until eventually that state settles all the way down. And it settles sufficiently deep that in all those parts, all those layers, there's a deep stillness and silence. Now you could have been given that straight away. Sri Aurobindo could. But it would be premature. There would be reactions, sometimes even a fear. It's interesting, I've seen this in a few cases when certain experiences were too rapid, too intense, and the person said, "What happened? I lost myself. I don't know if I existed. I was in this vastness or whatever the state was. I was not conscious of my body. I panicked." And so there's always a necessity for familiarizing. And that's why the spiritual culturing that comes from some reading or from some understanding of these things prepares you for the experience to be had more directly, more radically. Anupam is asking what's the difference between the power of Sat and Chit. Remember, Sat is what you are in existence, in substance, and Chit is the consciousness and the working of the awareness. So you see, the powers of Sat change the very substantiality in the materiality of the thing itself, or at various gradations, the materiality of matter, of life substance, mind substance, etc. The others are more the working of the consciousness within them. So they are as if complementary aspects. Sachin is asking what's the difference between Tantra and Siddhi. So Sri Aurobindo explains that some of these can be acquired by tantric methods, which are formula-based methods. But a formula-based method is not the direct consciousness method. In a formula-based method, you are dependent on the formula. For example, you might have a formula that makes your body feel light or makes it light. So you repeat that. As long as you repeat that, it seems to work. But the moment your repetition stops, or if you forget the mantra itself, you can't do it. Why? Because you are using an indirect method. So the method of Tantra, Mantra and Yantra, these are all variations of the same in different degrees. So what Tantra would do through procedure and technique, Mantra would do through repetition of word of power like a key to trigger power. Yantra, meaning machine, would do the same by technology. They are just technology on three different gradations. They are a process of nature, not an operation of consciousness freed. So as long as you are dependent on a process of nature, you have not fundamentally changed. So I take a specific medicine and I feel energized. If I don't take the medicine, I don't feel energized. So I have not fundamentally changed the nature of my biology and its working. I am reliant on a specific indirect technical process. And that's the problem with Tantra, Mantra or Yantra. So what modern technology is achieving by replication of a truth of a higher grade in a lower process is a technological support. It does not change consciousness. And that's why the technology gives you the freedom of a higher consciousness, but you're still stuck in a lower grade of consciousness, and there is the misuse, or there is a dependency, or there's the addiction or other problems which come. So you have, for example, the ability to talk to anybody on earth. What do you do with it? And if you are still living in a lower grade of consciousness, you use it to spy on others, or to gossip on others, or to waste energies. But still, you're forced, or you're accessing a wider grade of consciousness by connecting more widely through the internet, let's say. But what do you do with it? It helps you change consciousness, but indirectly, by kicking you, pushing you, but also hooking you into the negative aspects which come in it. You have opened yourself to reach out, but you've also opened yourself to be reached in from others and other influences through what are called phishing or internet scams, etc. So it's a two-way connection. You will get misused also if you don't have discrimination. So you better build discrimination. Or you go back to your fear, you withdraw, you disconnect and become narrow again, although the technology offers you a wideness. You understand, the technological methods are helpful up to a point. They can support a change of consciousness. They can assist a change of consciousness. But if the change does not happen, you are still the same. And this is what we are going to see more and more as technology proceeds. It will compel change of consciousness in you or force regression in you. But you can't stay the same anymore. Shiva says some of these siddhis seem easier to develop in children before teenage. Yes, because the faith is open, your mind is free. You don't have these preconceived notions, oh this is difficult, oh this is impossible, oh this is whatever. And it is often the preconceived notions which prevent. And that's why you will see as we will study the record of yoga and the structure of the integral yoga itself, the faith aspect in the working of the higher consciousness and the opening in faith is so critical. The faith is what gives in the material the acceptance of the higher faculty, power, freedom of the consciousness to operate freely. Otherwise, let's put it the other way, we have a negative faith. I am so small, I am so incapable, I am so rigid, and we live by that because we identify with that. So Anupam is saying about the stones which in Machu Picchu or in the pyramids, or even in India we have a lot of temples where we have these stones which bulge and the other stone on top sits and they fit exactly. We have this all over the place, even in India. You just go back a few centuries and you'll find all the stones are of that kind. And it's fascinating. You go to some of these temple walls, look carefully, and you'll see there's a line which goes like that between stones, and the upper and lower stones of granite are fitting exactly following the line. No gap. You can't even put a paper in between. And this is so common in India also. Nobody talks about it. The technology exists, but I don't think it was done with Siddhis. It was done by material which was used to soften granite by certain kinds of juices, I believe. And so they would place one thing over the other, and because of that juice, one would become soft and take the shape of the upper stone. Now that's a different thing. It was not done with these powers. But in principle, if somebody had the anima power, they could do that. With the anima power, you could, for example, take a stone with your hand, perhaps you would caress the top stone, soften it, and with the laghima power, you lift a big stone by making it light, place it on top, and then let this weight come back, and the two would settle and join and become smooth. It could be done just by hand. And we have stories of this kind if you go back to something which approaches the previous Satya Yuga. And there were people who could do that at that point. Okay, Sudhir, how can we open to the mothers and Sri Aurobindo's Ishita, Aishwarya or Vashita? What is stopping their direct action in us? Yes, you can open. And that is the whole point of the relationship with the Divine Mother, generally. If you think of yourself as the vehicle, the receptive base, evolutionary rising from below towards your divine potential. From above is this working of the divine Shakti, consciousness, power, working to help shape you. If you open to the side instead of above, you're opening to the universe, then you have the universal influence which binds you more and more to the existing rhythm and pace of universal growth, which will take 1,000,000 years. So you kind of isolate from the lower working of nature and open to the higher working of conscious Shakti. This switch is critical. You have to want it. You must have consciously a relationship with the higher divine Shakti, not lower nature. So the more you're able to withdraw and separate from lower nature and open consciously to the higher, if we call her higher nature or divine nature, the more she can act in you more directly. If in you there are parts which bind to lower nature and parts which open to the higher nature, you become a focal point in which certain changes take place from above, but from below there is also the resistance to that change. And there's the struggle and the conflict of that change, which is the case for all of us generally. Where that is, how much that is really a question of how much you've opened. So in a sense, this becomes essentially the method of the integral yoga itself, by consciously opening to the working of the divine Shakti. How much do you open, where you open, and how completely do you give, and with what faith you give, that makes all the difference. Vaijayanti asks, can we suppose that the working of Siddhi is always aligned with the divine will? No. It depends on where you are operating from. If it is a vital grade Siddhi, mental grade Siddhi, the willpower can exercise it. Your will can develop it. The capacity is there. You are tapping into a lower working of the Siddhi. But if you are taking it as part of the integral yoga process, then you would deliberately from the beginning be aligning yourself to the higher working of the divine will. And then the Siddhi would come as a consequence, not because you try to develop them separately. But you could also separately exercise that increasingly as you open to the higher working. So you'll feel, yes, this is working, this needs to be done, this needs to be shaped. There's an intention which comes from the higher, wider, intuitive understanding, and then an exercise of that will which comes as a consequence, etc. So the more one opens and grows in the higher consciousness, the more it would naturally align and become a consequence of that rather than something built by force of will. Contrast this with what would be taught in schools of magic. If you read some of the occult literature and all that, they will say magic is exercise of will. That's all there is to it. This is the definition of magic. Exercise of will. It's perfectly aligned to what we are describing in the Siddhis. But whose will? Which will? Your will, a vital will, mental will, individual, personal will. For what? To satisfy your desire, to satisfy your need, to satisfy your benefit and advantage, egoistic focal point being you. And that is the inferior, crude grade of magic with its consequences. If you actively exercise your will for a personal outcome, well, it will also have a reaction which will be on a personal level. When you exercise a will for a larger universal outcome, its response in the universal working will also be of a universal kind. And so, in both cases, you see the difference in consequence. Sudhir, will telepathy and clairvoyance become usable technologies in the future? Yes, I believe so very much. In fact, this is the point Aurobindo makes in this Life Divine, where he says what technology is doing by becoming more and more refined, it subtilizes its material basis more and more. So he gives the example. Earlier you had the telegraph, telephone with wires. So to connect from here to here, you had to put wires underground or overground, whatever. Without the wire, you could not communicate. Then the wire is replaced by wireless. You have radio waves. You are no more bound to wires. Not only that, you had a machine which converted the radio waves through various kinds of conversions into whatever sound. Now the thing is sitting inside your ear. It's becoming smaller and smaller, and until it becomes vanishingly small and merges directly with the thought. We're actually very close to that with certain technologies where you put these caskettes and you intend something, the computer picks it up and it moves the cursor on the screen. You can fly a plane with that casket. You intend to lean on the right and the plane turns to the right. You intend to lean on the left, the plane turns to left. So that's the closest we have come to from thought to movement. But what he says is eventually the technology in between becomes vanishingly small until eventually it becomes thought to thought, more and more. One of the things you will notice has happened today if you are used to making long distance video calls with people is that you feel their presence while you are talking to them even if they are on the other side of the earth. You feel them energetically. The call ends and you are energetically affected as if they were sitting right next to you. So on some level the technology is training us to connect strongly energetically with people who are far away. Except you are still relying on the habit of the video call. But there will come a point where that capacity or that tendency will have become strong enough that you will say, I am thinking of that person and now already I am feeling the consequence energetically. And then you are a victim of it. The very thought gives you this, is that a problem? It is, isn't it? So you'll have to learn to modulate this capacity or incapacity to change this. So you see what's happening, technology by forcing this integration through physical means is compelling a capacity on consciousness, including a capacity to be free, to develop. So yes, a lot of these things are going to be, so to say, compelled on us, whether we like it or not, just by that. Another thing which is going to be a form in which this will happen is through three-dimensional virtual reality. So you put on these goggles with 3D images and you are in a virtual reality. Let's say you are at the bottom of the ocean, you see fish swimming, you can reach out with your hand, touch them, or you have a panel before you touch buttons. So the virtual reality is so immersive as to be almost an experience of physical reality. You take off those goggles and it's a shock. You're switching between worlds literally. And as you acclimatize to this more and more, it will have its consequences. Now, you will meet somebody in the virtual world, you will touch, shake hands. And there will be strong energetic contact and even tangible contact, but they are nowhere physically present and yet you feel the contact. It was my very early experience when the internet came. I remember it was in the 1990s, early 90s, and I was in a chat room. new experience we were exchanging. I was very polite, nice. Turned out the other person was not so nice. At some point, suddenly the person said some very crude, coarse, abusive terms and then logged out for no reason at all, just like that. But when they projected that, I felt the energy as if it was a physical, energetic entry into me, as if someone had violated me energetically. Oh, it was painful, ugly, crude. How did that happen? It was the first time I realized that these virtual chat rooms are not so virtual, they are real energetically. You're still meeting people and something is happening. So quite a lot of this kind of technological interaction will force us to become conscious of these things and become sensitive to them. What consequence, that is to be seen. Will we use it to grow or get stuck in it? I don't know. We'll see that. Yes, Anupam has given an interesting example. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a very famous saint in Bengal and Orissa region. He would go into these states of ecstatic dance. And there's a particular spot in the Jagannath temple in Puri where he is supposed to have put his hand on the pillar and leaned into it while he was in a state of ecstasy. And the stone there has melted and the handprint is in the stone. And I would believe it. Yes, it is. Such things do happen. And in that state of ecstasy, the body itself is radiating something of that quality of consciousness. So remember, we spoke of Sat, power of Sat, and the power of Chit, consciousness power aspect. We did not mention the Ananda aspect, isn't it? So yes, in the Ananda state, the Sat and Chit powers can act, and yes, the stone can be easily affected by that. Not only stones, any physical object could undergo all kinds of transmutations or change of various kinds. Pandurang is asking, from an evolutionary perspective, can we see a relationship between the record of yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother's agenda? Yes, they are both, so to say, personal diary notes. One of Sri Aurobindo, one of the mother. Sri Aurobindo later recorded some of his other experiences through the sonnets and through Savitri. A lot of it is in Savitri, but not so in the way he did the record of yoga, which was in the earlier phase of the sadhana. The mother, when working particularly on the transformation of the body consciousness and the cellular consciousness, documented a lot of her work in the mother's agenda. So yes, these are both very precious documents in the work being done on a material level. I don't catch. So Lauren is saying, I would prevent myself from trying these things because I am afraid of interfering with the liberty of others, or to intervene in a manner which is misaligned with the divine will. Yes, this would be the main reason why we would not exercise it on others. But I would put it in two other ways. Let's look at it this way. When you say to someone who is ill, I wish you well, I hope you get well, you are intervening with a positive intervention. You can't say at that point, oh, I'm not sure if this is aligned to the divine will. Isn't it? So even if it is the soul's choice at that point to leave the body, you will not say that, oh, I wish you leave quickly. Because you don't know what the soul's choice is, you will still say, I wish you get well soon, or whatever your soul chooses. But maybe the soul will choose to stay if the person gets well soon. So in any case, you can wish them positively. So it all depends on which direction you're trying. So if you want to play with the crow's movement, maybe at that point it doesn't matter. So there are spaces where it may not matter at all, and you could experiment if you want to. Or there are spaces where even if you experiment, it will matter, but in a positive way. You want someone to get well, we'll do that. So you could experiment with such things. You could experiment on yourself, on your own body's healing, on your pets, for example, with whom you already have a relationship, or maybe family members with whom there is already a certain level of trust, to see if you can assist in shaping certain patterns, or just see how it works. Maybe. So I'm not saying that we should all try to do this. We were first understanding how it works. We understand that all of us have the ability already innate We are looking at how it works, and next time we will continue this topic. There's a longer text of Sri Aurobindo where he explains what are the dangers and the potentialities also of exercise of the Siddhis, and we'll look at some other examples of Siddhis. It's a quite fascinating topic, and we've already finished our 2 hours. So, but I would still say, if you notice how your will already operates, that's a good starting point. Notice how you're exercising your will and intentions all the time anyway, but except you don't realize you're exercising it in a negative way so often. When you're upset with somebody, how many times have you felt a strong emotional thought that says, oh, I wish the person just never came again, I wish they just go away, I wish they stop bothering me. But that's also an exercise of will, isn't it? And is that in alignment with the divine will? Probably not, but sometimes could be also, I don't know. So first I would say simply become aware. Become aware of how often you exercise your will unconsciously. Become aware of how often your will is exercised in contradictory directions at the same time. I really like this person, but I wish they didn't bother me. I want to be close to them, I want them to be with me, appreciate me, but I don't want them to disturb me. And it's happening simultaneously in different parts of you. So it's one of the things which is taught more in the conventional kind of magic, that if you align the will in different parts of you, then you are more likely to have an outcome. So when you concentrate for a particular outcome, if the will in these different layers of you are actually aligned, then they will synchronize for that outcome. Let's take a very simple thing. You're a shopkeeper and you want your sales to grow. Notice what happens. I've shared this before. I had a problem when I was sitting in the space where we had books for sale, and there was a part in me that said, I don't want to be disturbed by people, I'd rather just sit here and read. And then one day I realized that there was this thing, and I said, no, this is wrong. If I'm sitting here, it should be for this purpose. And I consciously opened my heart and said, I would like people to come and take the books. And immediately that day, the numbers shot up. Interesting. And I realized how much I was blocking it from happening because of my internal state. So, just in the work you do, can you align the different parts of you? For the work you have to do anyway. So again, it's not a question here of conflicting with the divine will. It's the intention of the work itself, isn't it, for the success in the work that you do. So there are many spaces I would suggest, if it interests you, to align yourself in will in these different parts, or if you want to take it to a higher turn, consciously in all these parts turn to the higher divine consciousness and say, let thy will be done in all these layers. What the divine wills, what you choose to be the best, let that happen, and I open myself for your working in all these layers. That will be a little higher up in effort, but you could work on both of these. So here's something interesting to try out. But also observe how this happens in any case. You will find the Ishita, Vashita and Aishwarya happening quite naturally with you unconsciously, and you're unaware until you notice, yes, it actually happens, but I didn't intend it, it just happened. You also notice Vyapti and Prakamya. Remember these two things? How they happen, both in perception as well as the influence that you sometimes project into others. Start noticing, start observing, become conscious. And then more and more in that consciousness you can open to the divine will to act through these natural processes. With that perhaps even your capacity might grow. So it's a good homework based on what we have read to try to develop. So next time we will look at a few more examples of this, and also the way the higher faculty of intuition will work in the perception itself of Vyapti and Prakamya. And so it will be quite fascinating, and we will also study the text of Sri Aurobindo explaining the utility and dangers of the Siddhis, and then how he uses Vyapti to understand the working of animals, even in a butterfly's working, in the inner consciousness of the butterfly. It's another interesting example of what we will see next time. And then the working of certain visions in people and how they work. So all this is going to be part of our exploration next time. For today, remember, all Siddhis exist already in nature. They exist in you. Only owing to habitual limitations, you make a use of them which is mechanical and limited. By breaking these limitations, one is able to get the conscious and voluntary use of them. Very simple. And then these powers can only be entirely acquired or safely used when we have got rid of egoism and identified ourselves with the infinite will and the infinite consciousness. So if less and less you look at these things from a personal viewpoint, more and more from a larger perspective, already it's less dangerous to apply their use. For the text I have read today, the link I will put in the description box shortly, within half an hour. I have not yet put it. So those of you who might want to reread this text, you will find this useful. And let's take a moment to center ourselves in this idea. Sri Aurobindo describing how he influenced to infuse yogic states in people, change their internal state. This is how the divine acts in you right now, and the Divine Mother. And if you have a deep personal relationship with the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, they also are there right now here to assist in this shift. And so call upon them and opening yourself, opening your mind. I'm going to give an analogy. You saw how he influenced the dog. Imagine if at that point the dog said, "Here I open my mind to you, fill me with the higher human mind." Or if we, the human dogs, human animals, let's say, open our mind and say, "Fill me with the spiritual light and the supramental light," or whatever I can receive of it. Raise my mind, illuminate it, intuitivize it, and he can infuse that into you. And since the working would be aligned to the divine will, and with his understanding of your capacity or your lack of readiness or readiness, only as much as you are able to take now, and then a little more just to show you that there's more, and then work on you repeatedly until the whole thing eventually settles into you. That's how it could be, as easy as this. But you must want it, you must open yourself, then you must work to retain it. So let's hold this as an aspiration, and maybe we do a little bit of an experimentation, at the very least open ourselves for the higher working in us more and more consciously. Namaste.